Welcome back to Ask Steve Judd. My name is Sue Brayne, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favourite subjects, which is to do with endings and death and dying. And we're going to be looking astrologically about how we can just be aware of endings and death in the chart. So, Steve, how would you like to start this off?
By also saying that we're also going to be talking about conception and new beginnings.
We certainly are. You see, it's my favorite subject, so I forgot about beginnings and also obviously every time something dies, something begins. So it's
Yes,
a whole cycle,
always.
a great cycle of life and death.
The
Okay.
end is real. Yeah. I
How,
mean, when I say we're talking about death and dying, we're not just talking about the physical ending of one's physical life. We're also looking at the death, the ending of a relationship or a career
yeah,
or project. So, you know, there's various different forms of death, but all of them have certain signatures. But I need to qualify from the start. I'm not going to say it's impossible to predict death, because I've done it for quite a few clients, family members over the years. But it's difficult to be precise and accurate. And if you can predict death, you should never do it. You always qualify that there's a stronger potential than normal, but that doesn't mean it will happen, because to predict death takes out the free will element.
yeah, and I think you can always couch it in, well, not couch it, but sort of suggest a theme of maybe becoming aware of something maybe coming
Indeed.
up or something like
Indeed.
that. Yeah.
Indeed. And there's different types of signatures for different types of death. I mean, if you're looking at the end of a career, it's really surprising how many careers and how many relationships come to an end at the 29 to 30-year cycle, the Saturn cycle.
Yes.
You know, you do a career job for 30 years or in a relationship for 30 years, you get married, you have kids, you watch the kids grow up, the kids leave home. And then after a few years of having fun with your partner, you look at each other and think, maybe we've outgrown each other, time to move on.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens.
And that also brings in the 7-year cycle, doesn't it? You know, when Saturn
Indeed.
poses and
Yeah, very, very Saturnine here.
yes.
When I'm talking about the death of someone's body, as in the end of their physical presence in this third dimensional planet, there's never any accurate way of predicting death. And as I say, you shouldn't do it even if you could. But there are signatures. If someone is already overweight with a heart condition, and then Uranus passes on top of their Sun and their Mars, and they're not willing to do anything about their health, then they're ripe for a sudden heart attack or sudden brain aneurysm or something like that. You know.
So you can use this as a kind of warning, can't you? Just, you know, reading someone's chart, just start to take care of yourself. This is coming up.
Sometimes I have to look people in the eye and say, look, you're overweight, you're not looking at your nutrition, you don't seem to care about your body, and next year Uranus is going to pass on your Sun. So you need to do something, otherwise something's going to happen, something's going to get done. And it's always better to act than it is to react.
Absolutely.
You know, and I love it. I'm so proud that I live in a country where there's a free national health service on a point of demand. We've had a free national health service in this country since the late 40s. So, you know, 75 years we've had an NHS. Unfortunately, some people take it for granted instead of as a privilege. And they're like, oh no, I'll just carry on eating my fast food and my junk food and getting fat and drinking beer. Oh, I've had a heart attack. Right, I'll get the doctors to sort it out. Doesn't work like that. We're all responsible for our own health. I mean, the NHS is vastly underfunded and understaffed. So I think we should also take responsibility for ourselves a lot more.
And I think that's a really lovely way of using astrology actually to look at how you can begin to take responsibility for yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Yes, absolutely, Sue. I totally agree. And that's the horoscope will show, the horoscope has the blueprint of potential, will show one's propensity for strengths and weaknesses at the physical level.
Mm.
The horoscope often shows the way one's tolerances or intolerances or even allergies can be. And it also shows the way one's physical body is, whether one is prone to issues around the glandular system or the eyes or burnout or something like that. And it's all there as a blueprint of potential, which can be worked on in a really positive way by building the body up through good food, good exercise, good herbal care, or it can be ignored at your peril, and then a big transit will come along and boom.
Yeah, I just want to talk because we're talking about, at the moment, we're talking about endings, the fourth house, the eighth house, and the 12th house, because these particularly are significant. I've always looked at them significantly, about how we deal or address endings. And I just wanted to ask you about that.
I would agree in that the water houses 4, 8, and 12, they are the most empathic, sensitive houses. They are the houses that deal with feelings and emotions, and as a result, they do deal with the stuff that a lot of people simply don't want to deal with. But to me, the fourth house is much more around ancestry and
The past.
um, stuff around family and home. And of course, depending on family environments and family situations, that can affect one's health.
Mm.
The eighth house is more about dealing with not just the unknown, but the unknowable, and coming to terms with your own fear and embracing your own psychology. But the 12th house is definitely, it's the last house of the zodiac. It relates to the 12th sign, and it deals with the nebulous, the dissolving, and sometimes the dissolving of life force. It can be an area of confusion and fatigue and weariness, as much as it can be an area of art, spirituality, and imagination.
Yeah, I
So
think, yeah, when planets are going through the 12th house, the transiting planets, especially if you've got planets in the 12th house, I think that's always a time to really pay attention to what may be passing out of your life, and therefore to make room for what may come.
indeed, although age is always a factor, because you
Oh,
don't see people with a lot of planets in the 12th house in their 20s asking a lot of questions around their mortality. Whereas when they're in their 60s or 70s, they do.
yes. Yeah.
So,
It's a
you
sign.
know,
Yeah.
but it's easy for us to say that because we're old buggers.
And I
Well,
think, when we're looking at death and dying, I mean, Mars, and we're talking about Mars and Uranus, the kind of the sudden death that could
sudden.
indicate. And talk to me a little bit about Neptune and how that can play out in people's lives and bringing endings.
I rarely see planets like Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, even I know Pluto's a planet of death and rebirth, but you don't see Pluto as that obvious in physical death that often. It's much more metaphorical or psychological death.
Mhm.
Mars and Uranus, yes, they deal with the sudden, whether it's a car crash or an accident or an violence.
Yes.
Saturn obviously has a lot to do with death, and in his gestures, in his capacity as old father time, Kronos, the skeleton with the scythe. But
Yeah.
there you're talking about old age a lot of the time. I consider Neptune, I have an ambivalent relationship with Neptune. I don't think it's possible for anyone to really ever understand the influence of Neptune. It's an invisible planet. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's covered in cloud. Its true nature is constantly obscured. And you can sense it and feel it and intuit it and know it, but you can't understand it or logicalize it. There's no rational explanation of way of dealing with Neptune. And Neptune does have the effect of both bringing a strong capacity for spirituality, art, and intuition into one's life when it transits a point, but also, depending on your physical circumstances, it can bring a hell of a lot of fatigue, weariness, and tiredness, and dissolve
Yes.
one's basic life force.
I've always wondered, and I've always wondered this. Do you think Neptune could trigger dementia later in life?
I actually do some seminars on medical issues using astrology on my intermediate course for students. And there are certain signatures, both in terms of aspect and planetary placing, that denote the potential for certain illnesses, diseases, infections, whatever. With cases of mental deterioration, such as dementia or even Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia, I think it's really difficult to be able to diagnose this as a potential from a chart. It's much easier to look at a chart and say, oh, that's a really strong, that's a nice Mercury-Saturn conjunction, or a lovely Mercury-Mars conjunction. You're going to keep your marbles till the day you die.
Yes.
It's much easier to see people who won't get dementia
Yes.
and Alzheimer's
Yes.
than it is than those who will.
Mm. Mm.
You'd think that Mercury conjunct Saturn, for example, would be a really difficult aspect for mental health, but actually it's the opposite. Yes, you're shy and inhibited and young and inconfident when young, but as you grow older, your mentality, your intellect, your confidence grows and grows and grows.
You
So the
get
mind
wise,
remains
don't you?
intact until the day you die.
There's a wisdom that comes with that conjunction, I always think.
Yes, yes.
And that's
Whereas,
hard learned.
yes,
Yeah.
whereas a Mercury square or opposition to Neptune always brings the potential for muddled thinking.
Yes.
I always say to these people, look, you're simply not a creature of logic and rationality. You're more a creature of intuition and imagination
Yes.
and
Yes.
poetry and
Mm.
art rather than mathematics.
Now, I'm conscious of time, and we want to talk about beginnings as well as endings, because as we're talking about the great cycle here, death and rebirth, and death and life and death. So where do you want to start with that, Steve, about leading from this endings into beginnings?
I'm kind of in a relatively unique position because I honestly don't know any other astrologers who do as many readings as I do. Admittedly, I've not done that much in recent months because I've been recovering from burnout. But up until the end of last year, I was doing 700-800 readings a year consistently. Now I've cut down to 300 or 400, but it's still a lot. And when you do that many readings, you get to recognize certain signatures. When someone's about to say, okay, I'm going to change my job, I'm going to start a new career sometime in the next 6 months. And at the time they say that, you think, oh, Mars is in your 8th house now. Right. So that's going to hit your midheaven in a couple of months' time. So you say, okay, well, look, Mars is going to land on your midheaven on that particular Monday. That is a great time to initiate, start, launch, begin a new professional venture, career, project. Anything that hits the midheaven is a great time to launch something new at the professional level. In terms of personal growth and self-development, again, this conflicts with most astrologers' advice, but I always say, okay, when Saturn or Jupiter hits the ascendant, Jupiter, because it will give you a big surge of physical energy for a year while it's in the first house, and Saturn, because it's at the start of a 29-year cycle. So if you get it right in the first year, you set yourself up for 30 years.
It really grounds you, doesn't it? It just really makes you put your feet on the ground. Right, what am I going to do?
But with physical conception and birth, there are two factors that work. Not guaranteed, obviously, because nothing in astrology is guaranteed. Both have been the subject of empirical research, and they've both been proven to have more than 3 times higher statistical chance of working than the average should dictate. Long term, the single most common aspect for conception, which unfortunately only happens once every 12 years, is when Jupiter passes on top of the female moon. That brings a great deal of fertility.
Mm.
If I'm permitted to say this word on YouTube, fecundity.
Fecundity, yeah.
It's a great word.
Love it.
It creates a fertility. It expands everything it touches. And I just get this impression that it really sort of opens up things around the female reproductive system to make it easier to conceive. Many people, many women conceive when Jupiter's on their moon. As I say, more than 3 times the average. There is another factor here, and this was empirically researched in the 1960s in Czechoslovakia, as it was at that time, by a chap called Dr. Jonas, Jonas.
Yeah.
And he ran a survey over 2 years on best times for conception, and he got incredibly strong, like more than 99% success rates. His work was discredited in later years. He was under Russian control at the time, but I know his work, and I'm a firm believer that it's much easier for a woman to conceive over the 24-hour period when the moon in the sky is in the right relationship, exactly the same relationship with the sun as it was when she was born.
Oh, that's a great one.
So if a woman is born
Yes.
with the moon sextile the sun 3
Yes.
to 5 days after the new moon, I will
Yeah.
say to them, well, if you want to conceive, if you go for it 4 or 5 days after the new moon, you
Yeah.
stand a much better chance than average of conception.
Mm.
So you obviously you need to know your own chart for this, but I'm not going to get too basic, but I have quite a few emails of people going, you told me the best time to go for it, and now I'm a very happy parent. Thank you so much. It works. And it even works in the non-normal way. If I say I've helped people conceive, that sounds really gross. I've advised people on the best time to use IVF, for example, and they've done it. I've got a couple of clients, one who's quite a good friend, who have implanted the seed into their body at the moment that the moon was in exactly the same angle with the sun as it was when they were born, and they succeeded first time on IVF. Both
Wow.
of them.
Well, it does make sense. Conception has to do with the moon cycle. It has to.
Oh,
How could
yes.
you not? How could it not? And the other thing I'm really interested is in the fifth house, transiting planets in the going through the fifth house, maybe Jupiter or Venus or whatever that is. Do you want to talk a little bit about the influence of the fifth house on children,
Well,
beginning things?
children, particularly younger children, the fifth house can be very childlike. It can also be very childish,
Well,
because it is connected with Leo after all.
yes.
And it does deal a lot with childcare and infancy, and the way one, because Leo is all about Leo, the pride of a lion. But the pride of a lion isn't just about the pompous, arrogant, the big hair and the clothes. The lion's pride is its children. You can
Yeah.
tread on the lion's tail, but if you tread on its children, you're dead.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and as I know from my days in stand-up comedy, you can insult a Leo every time you like, but if you talk about their ugly children, you run. So yeah, the fifth house and the fifth sign that relating to Leo does have a lot to do with children, but I suggest it's less to do with conception and more to do with upbringing and rearing, especially in the first 14 years. You hit on something just now. The moon is fundamental
Yeah.
to conception and birth.
Mm.
We are the only planet in the solar system that can see its moon. All the other planets that have moons, the moons are too far away to be able to be seen with the naked eye. And the fact that the moon, the full moon, to our naked eye is exactly the same size as the sun. I mean, if it weren't, we wouldn't get eclipses. What astronomers call coincidence and what I, as an astrologer, call serendipity
Yes.
and cosmic engineering is a wonderful analogy between the feminine and the masculine. I do think the sun and moon are the original god and goddess.
Mm.
And it's amazing when it comes to the birth moment. And I was dealing with a client just yesterday. I was dealing with a client who was born with the moon at 0 degrees 2 minutes of Virgo. And I'd never dealt with this lady before. And I said to her, I looked at her chart, I said, oh, you got the moon at the moon moved into Virgo 4 minutes before you were born. And I said, I bet if you ask your mother, she'll tell you that she was trying everything to give birth to you and you just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't come out. And then all of a sudden, boom, just as the moon changes sign. And I've seen that so many times that a baby will wait until the moon changes sign. It happened with my granddaughter. My granddaughter's got the moon at 0 degrees 10 minutes of Sagittarius. She waited.
Isn't that sort of instinctive? That's the sort of the basic of our instincts, isn't it? It's so attuned to the moon.
Yes. It also raises questions around if there is consciousness and life before the moment of birth and after the moment of death.
Yeah.
But that's a subject for another session, I
Oh my
suggest.
gosh, it's too right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know that we agree on most things
Yeah.
around that,
Yeah.
but perhaps that's a
Yeah.
subject for another
Yeah.
session.
Yeah. It's so
But,
interesting, this whole concept of the power of the moon. And actually, just to go back to endings, and I'm just wondering about also that perhaps instinctively, perhaps the endings or death could come at the end of a cycle of the moon.
do you know what? That's a really interesting thought. The idea of a woman conceiving at the moment where the sun and moon are in the same angle with each other as they were when she was born, I know that to be true in many cases. When I say many cases, 30%, 35%.
Yeah.
And when you consider that that angle is only going to be there for 12 hours every month, that's a very high ratio. Yeah. So yes, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some similar pattern at the moment of one's transition.
Yeah. Be so
Into a
interesting to
different
do a
dimensional
research project on that,
existence.
wouldn't it?
Yeah. And I know I said that Pluto deals with death and rebirth, but it's more at a psychological level. But I don't think it's random coincidence that we named that the furthest most planet, the gateway planet between us and the cosmos, as Pluto, and its moon as Charon, the ferryman over the Styx.
Yes.
From the land of the living into the land of the dead.
Yes, absolutely.
So
yes. There's something there, isn't there, about that Pluto energy. If I'm my experience, I'm still alive, obviously, as you can tell, but I have definitely died a Pluto's death. Definitely in my psyche.
Yes. I often, having survived and thrived since Pluto passed opposite my sun, and I know what I went through at that time, and I deliberately chose at that time to go through some very major reconstructive surgery on my face when Pluto was opposite my sun, because I thought, kill or cure.
Yes.
I now find myself recommending people saying, well, look, Pluto's going to oppose your sun for this year. So if you want to do any seriously challenging work on yourself, either in terms of deep psychological cleansing and physical work on the body, do it when Pluto's opposite your sun, because it's going to hurt. The work you're going to do is going to hurt, and Pluto opposite your sun is going to hurt.
Yes.
So you might as well double the pain and push yourself into the very depths of the unknown and the unknowable.
And that's a lovely thing about astrology. You can do it consciously. You can prepare for it.
Or you can facilitate it. You can empower it. Yes.
You can draw in help as well. You get people around you to help you go through this time.
Yes. And then you come out of it psychologically invulnerable.
Yes. Yes.
And no one can ever inappropriately influence you or manipulate you again, because you get really good BS filters, you know.
So too. Steve, is there anything you'd like to just finish off saying? Again, I love this conversation. I think we could go on all day, but anyway.
Yeah.
Time is not permitting.
We are programmed, probably as a result of 2,000 years of, or at least 2,000 years of dominator culture based on religion and our programming of heaven and hell, to believe that when we die, that's it, and we go to a place where we're either going to go into damnation or heaven, depending on how good we've been. And this just relates to the old Indian notion of karma, the Eastern origins of karma. I think that death and birth is just a transition point from one dimension of consciousness to another. And I know you kind of agree with this.
Very much so.
I urge people, don't be scared of your death.
Yeah.
I'm going to welcome my death. I am looking forward to that transition. I'm not in a rush. When it happens, I'll be ready, and I will go willingly without fear, because I know that the support team's waiting on the other side. There's a big party waiting. Other people who go into it fearful and terrified because they probably haven't lived a good life, they do end up in limbo for a time whilst their soul is recovering. Well, and limbo's not an easy place. So embrace your death, embrace your mortality.
I would say so. And also start talking about it to other people. Find other people that are willing to have these discussions with you. It might not be your family, but it may be friends that are willing to do it. And in my experience of doing a lot of research into how we don't talk about death and dying, I think it's not because we're frightened of it because we don't know what to say. But just know we're all going to go. And astrology can help you really prepare well for the whole process of life and death.
Death and taxes, isn't it? The two certain things in life.
On that lovely note of taxes, we'll leave it for this time. Thanks so much, Steve, and see you all next time.
Yeah, a couple of weeks' time, a few weeks' time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.